Dave Palumbo standing here with a legend in baseball, Johnny Bench. This is a man who I grew up watching on TV with my dad. You know, games, you beat the Mets a lot, and I hated you for that. But you know what?
Well, thank you
I
very
love
much.
it.
Yeah, I'm proud to say I'm glad of that. Yeah, I actually hit my 300th home run at Mets at Shea Stadium, so have a few remembrances. Although you had to face that pitching staff, which wasn't any great treat.
Who was the best pitcher on the Mets staff in your estimation back then?
Well, Seaver, obviously, he stands out. But you had Kuzman and Matlack, you had Gentry, and of course Nolan was there for a while, and you had a guy named McAndrews. It was a tough weekend. I mean, people don't understand that if you got 2 hits in that series, you had a pretty good week, actually. Right. So, you think, well, he's in the slump. I said, no, I had to face the Mets. So it was.
I hated your team.
Well, I hated Shea. And it doesn't bother me that you hated me. You'll get over that. That's why they have psychologists, people that need work.
Why do you think people are get so enmeshed in baseball to the point where it's like a part of their life, and they actually psychologically will suffer if their team doesn't do well?
Well, they can all play it, Doesn't matter what size you are. You don't have to be, a 300-pound lineman. You don't have to be a football player. You don't have to be 7 feet tall. And we're watching these guys and everything else. It's kind of like weightlifting, so many different divisions that everybody can reach a certain degree, and they can all play shortstop or they can play the outfield. And so it's really kind of something that they always are assembled with. You start playing softball for women, and you get men, kids that play in baseball. So all of a sudden, they all think that they can be a Major League Baseball player at some point in their life. So they love the game. They love the technique. We just have to get them past some of the pains and the bad hops and everything else that they learn to do. But they've always been great fans.
I always said the catcher's position had to be the most difficult position.
That's why you're here. That's why you are the announcer. You know your stuff. I'm telling you right now, this guy.
I mean, because you're sitting in the most uncomfortable position known to man for the longest period of time of any other player on the field.
That's why I broke 7 cups. Yeah, I was in the most vulnerable position of all. At least playing in other positions, which I did. You'd had to play five games at one position just to feel like you caught one game. I caught 54 days in a row without a day off. I caught 154 out of 158. So it was pain. It was stressful, but you were a catcher, and you find out people don't really care if you're hurt or not. You are the catcher, and that's it. An outfielder will run into the wall. And a trainer and a manager will run 400 feet to pick him up, and an infielder will get a bad hop, and they'll go pick him up, and a catcher will take one dead in the cup. You can't find a trainer or a manager within 100 miles. He'll get up. Don't worry about it. Let's go have a cup of coffee.
What was the best piece of equipment during your time that they came out with that you felt like, man, this was smart?
The glove. Oh man, it's hard to catch without that glove. I'm telling you.
You've been around that long, huh?
I guess the knee saver, which I never used, so I can't tell you if it was great. No, we didn't have it, and that little chin strap that came down to block the Adam's apple, but. It was just the legs. It was.
Who invented the chin? Is that Carlton Fisk who did that?
I think they started with Steve Yeager using it. I used a flap one time, and it was tied together with 2 pieces of leather. And the first game, I got a foul ball, broke the straps and everything else, hit me right in the throat. Really? In the baseball. So
how long does that take to heal?
Oh, you don't care. It's it's 1 inning. It's like after the game, I wish somebody would just walk away, leave the game, and say, "Wonder how Johnny's doing." No, they never do that. You take 1 inning off, and they forget about it. But the strength of the legs was the most powerful thing that I had. And it protected me, and why my knees are still good today.
Did you train back then, like weights?
Oh, no. You never had a weight.
Really? They wouldn't let you do that, right?
Not even close. I mean, if you even act like you wanted to pick up a dumbbell, you were just like, no, don't do that. It'll tighten you up across the chest. We didn't have the Nautilus. We didn't have the things where you can learn to do it properly. Right. Now these guys train like fiends. I grew up without knowing getting strong. I worked in the peanut fields, lifting 80 and 100-pound peanut sacks. Wow. So I would have to pick them up, when I was only like 5'2" when I started, and I'd put them on my head, and they're 80 and 100-pound sacks, and I'd be throwing them up on the truck.
You were clean and pressing back then.
All of a sudden, I was cleaning and pressing, and I didn't realize the strength. But I did work on my legs constantly. I ran in the sand. I tried to strengthen my legs as much as I could because that was the strength and motivation to keep me going. So I always wanted beautiful calves, So I probably won most of these competitions. That's why I don't take my pants off.
You could have done well in this, Johnny. Let me ask you a question. Who was the most dangerous pitcher to catch for?
Any knuckleballer.
Really? And who was the worst that you caught?
Well, I did in the minor leagues. Actually, I caught a knuckleballer, and I told myself never to do this again. It's embarrassing and everything else.
And you take the blame for it if you don't catch the ball.
Well, yeah, people don't know it. I mean, why can't he catch that? It just seems like that. And I said, well, try to catch a butterfly with your fingers. It's kind of like that. They go everywhere and all that stuff. The guy who bounced the ball, and a curveball, it bounced in front of the plate, bounced up, and hit you all over. And I just pick up the ball and throw it back harder to him than he threw it to me.
Would there be like some kind of tension
I had a better
between
arm than they did. Yeah, I mean, so I just threw it back to them harder, and they said, get it over of the plate. Sorry.
Who was the best pitcher that you caught, do you think, in the history of your career?
Well, Seaver came over in the trade, so he was there.
Right.
Yeah, and so, but there was a kid named Wayne Simpson. He was 12-1 at the All-Star break and wound up losing the one game 1-0. Hurt his arm, and wish he'd had Tommy John surgery. He was the most phenomenal pitcher you can ever imagine. Jim Maloney, who threw a couple no-hitters, threw 1 and 10 inning no-hitter, 187 pitches, walked 10 and hit 1. But he had the most unbelievable stuff, so I was very fortunate in my career. But Seaver coming over and just his legend was enough for all you Met fans.
Yeah, that's true. We hated that too. Let me ask you this question: who was the fastest base runner? The one that you hated to get on first base, because you knew you were going to have trouble throwing this guy out if he stole.
Well, you had Brock, and then Lopes came along. Lopes combined he combined still technique and speed and everything else, and they tried it a few times.
Yeah. What was your percentage of picking guys off there?
Well, it was high. It was very high. I don't know. We didn't keep stats, and that day I ran into a guy who has all those stats, and he said you rated the highest of all
Really?
time. Yeah, well, see, some teams had 5 base runners, but only 2 would run. So you could say, well, okay, you got 3 of them that didn't run, and then Brock told me one day. I said I didn't realize.
Lou Brock.
Lou. Yeah, I threw him out 3 times in one game, and he came to the plate and he said, "You know what I said?" And I said, "Knowing you, Lou, you said if I get on, I'm going again." So it was that's just the
So it was like a
competition.
challenge. Yeah.
It was.
Did you like that when he would be on? Because you knew that if you threw him out, you were going to get a lot of accolades for that.
I lived for it. Well, it wasn't so much accolades. It was just such, they wanted to watch the one-on-one, the mano-a-mano, and it was just, I was up for it, and I had the skills, and he had the skills, and you're going to win. Remember, I stole 25 bases in a row.
You were one of the faster catchers.
No, I never was. I was just the smartest. But so you stole 25 bases, and you always steal on the pitcher. You don't steal on the catcher. That's why I'll always say.
What does that mean? Explain that.
Well, you got to jump. It doesn't really matter what the catcher does. You only, in a normal base runner, the good base runners takes 3.1 seconds to get from first to second. Mm-hmm. So the pitcher releases at 1.4 or 1.45. Right. So you've got 1.45 or 1.5 to throw at 127 feet 3 inches, 1 foot above the bag, and get them out.
Very scientific. Yeah, I never thought about that.
This is the challenge,
Who's the fastest guy you think in Major League Baseball? Was it?
Ooh. Willie Davis probably played with the Dodgers.
That's good pick, yeah.
He was just unbelievable. He wasn't a great base stealer, but boy, when he took off, and then of course Deion Sanders came into the game, and then
Jackson. What about him?
Well, Joe, he thundered. You didn't know what. He was running so fast the ground shook. It was like he and Kirk Gibson and all those guys. So I don't know if you ever classified them as being, how fast they were, but they were phenomenal. Of course, Mantle was my idol, and he was lightning quick. So.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure being with you.
Thank you, Johnny.
Yep.
All right. Dave Palumbo with a legend, Johnny Bench.